one of the talks that I've been really waiting for. Brett Vaughn is a good friend and a fabulous lawyer. Brett's one of the most strong scientific lawyers that I've met personally. He's really cutting edge in a number of major litigations, and I don't think everyone knows him. A lot of people in the business certainly know him, but I'm anticipating really big things from Brett and his firm. So Brett, tell us a little about yourself and the firm that you guys are. It's a relatively new firm, but it's really doing great things right now.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Bob. So from Nigh, Goldberg, Raso, and Vaughn, we formed about a year and a half ago now. All of us on the partner level were and still are working on the Valsartan litigation. It's how we met and started the firm. And then my history, I was previously a nurse. I have a bachelor's of science in nursing. I was a nurse for about a year down in Joplin until the tornado hit down there. And then I moved up to Kansas City for law school. And then while I was in law school, I started kind of looking into hernia mesh and everything and the science behind it. And that's kind of where I started my legal career, was with hernia mesh, and then the Valsartan litigation, which I know we're talking about today.
So we're talking about Valsartan today. What is Valsartan? How does it work?
Yeah, so Valsartan is a blood pressure medication. It's called an ARB, which is a angiotensin reuptake inhibitor. There's a lot of different ARBs on the market, and it's just the way in which it decreases your blood pressure. Initially, this medication, Valsartan, was sold under the name Vaughn. And that is the name brand. And we don't sue the name brand on this medication, and that's different in most litigations. Typically, we can only sue a name brand manufacturer under the law. In this litigation, it's very unique, where we're suing the generic manufacturer because the drug is contaminated.
How do you know the drug was contaminated?
Everyone found out in the middle of 2018 when the FDA released a recall on a majority of the Valsartan that was on the market. Made by numerous different companies. They had tested it and found it was contaminated with what's called NDMA, or N-nitrosyl dimethylamine, which is one of the most potent carcinogens known to man. It's actually what they give to rats in order to give them cancer in the lab.
How did it get contaminated?
That is a good question. And what a big part of the litigation has been about was uncovering the reasons why. And what it appears to us is the main reason that it was contaminated was they were trying to make the drug as cheap as possible. And in doing so, they changed the chemical pathways they were using to make the drug. And those chemical pathways were significantly cheaper, like astronomically cheaper for these companies to make. But a byproduct of that reaction is the NDMA, which is can cause cancer. They either didn't catch that it was causing that, did not realize that it could create that, which they should have realized, or they realized it was creating that and tried to hide it. And it was more than one manufacturer. There were different manufacturing processes causing this that made a wide range in the contamination depending on where it came from. So there are some pills that came out of India, other pills that came out of China. The Chinese pills have by far the highest contamination, but the pills out of India still are contaminated as well too.
Is there like a time frame that they were contaminated, or are they still contaminated? Like, what's going on with that?
So they're no longer contaminated. There was the recall in the middle of 2018. Initially, we thought that was going to clean everything up. There were still a few companies that continued to sell medications that were contaminated that got found out later, up until about 2019. And the contamination goes back quite a few years in the teens, so 2015 or a little bit sooner than that. It's hard to tell exactly when it started. Is
there an amount that you need to be had exposed to for this to be a part of this lawsuit?
There is. That's something we look at on a case-by-case basis. It's not something we can tell at intake if you're going to qualify for this lawsuit. And there's several reasons for that. The first one I was talking about before is the whole name brand issue. If you were only taking name brand, then it was not contaminated and you're not going to have a case. But most people that were taking this, in the last decade are going to be on generic because there was a generic out and that's all the insurance is going to cover. So then we have to look at the exact pills and who is making those pills. If the pills came out of China and you were taking those pills for like 6 months, you likely took a high enough dose that it could cause cancer. The same pills out of India over 6 months might not be enough. So it's really a combination on which pills you took and for how long you took it for, because that's going to increase your exposure. And some of the companies had some pills that were not contaminated. So the Chinese, every pill was contaminated. Some of the other companies in India, they did have some clean generic pills that they were manufacturing and selling in the United States.
What are some of the cancers that you're seeing the most on your intake? I know we're intaking some cases. We're working with Brett's firm, but you're working with a lot of other firms as well, and you have some of your own cases.
One of the ones that is most associated with NDMA or N-nitrosyl-dimethylamine, the carcinogen that's in these pills, would be stomach cancer, intestinal cancer, and liver cancer. That's where we see some of the strongest epidemiology, both from people that took the medication and developed cancer, and also just in rat studies. We know that those are the most common cancers that are going to form. The other ones that we see a lot of are blood cancers, so leukemias and stuff like that. And the reason for that probably is the cancer latency for something like a blood cancer is a lot shorter. And so from the time of exposure to something to the time that you can get cancer, much quicker for a blood cancer. A bowel cancer on average takes a little bit longer to form. But when we're talking about a bell curve of people that are going to get cancer from something, we're probably not at the peak yet from Valsartan. We're probably still moving up that bell curve. And so we're seeing those cancers forming, and we'll probably continue to see cancers forming for many years after this as a result of this contamination.
So this lawsuit will be going on for a while because the ones who've been exposed might not be ill yet, essentially.
It's a good question, and that's definitely a potential of this litigation going on for some time because people are going to continue developing cancer from this until the people that took the medication passed away, basically. What they'll do for the litigation, kind of unknown on how things will get tied up. But there will be additional cancers coming over the years.
My other question is, how do you as a firm figure out what pills these clients were taking? Like, how do you find out if they were the contaminated ones or not?
And it's not an easy process. So we get their pharmacy records, which is pretty standard. In those pharmacy records, there's something called an NDC code. I guess the first thing we'll look for is just the name of the drug that's in the pharmacy record. So if it says Vaughn, which is the name brand, not contaminated. If it says Valsartan, then we take the next step. We pull the NDC codes, and then we have a database of NDC codes that correspond to whether it was contaminated or not and to the approximate levels of contamination. We basically spreadsheet that out for every single time a person filled a prescription and then run our calculations to get an approximate exposure for that specific person.
Can you just give us a little overview of kind of what's happened over the course of these years, how the case started, and then there's an insurance coverage issue and all kinds of things going on? Could you walk us through that a little?
Yeah, and anyone that's been in these types of lawsuits against these big pharmaceutical companies understands they take a very, very long time. That's something we hear from clients a lot too, is how long it's taking. And so this started back in 2018. So this has been going on for about 6 years now. And it's a very, very complex litigation, even compared to most mass torts, because we have multiple defendants here. So it's not just one company, like I was saying, that did this. There's numerous companies that were manufacturing what's called the API, or active pharmaceutical ingredient, that was contaminated. We've sued everyone from the top down in this litigation. So there are more defendants than I actually can even state off the top of my head, which makes it much, much more complex when you're fighting that many defendants that are pretty much a united front against us. So that slows things down some. There's also more aspects to this litigation than just personal injury, which is a little bit more unique. So there's the personal injury multi-district litigation. Also consolidated is a class action for the insurance companies that paid for the pills that were contaminated. There's a class action for the individual consumers that paid for the pills that were contaminated. And there's also a class action for medical monitoring to try and get medical care for people to have preventative cancer screening that took the medication going forward. So there's numerous aspects of this litigation kind of moving at the same time. The judge in this case decided that the first trial we would have would be on the insurance companies paying for the contaminated product. The reason for that was probably because it's an easier amount to solidify, like what are the damages? It's easier to point to, here's how much they paid. And then we can get a lot of rulings on experts and other issues of the case while we go through that trial that will then apply still to the personal injury cases and everything else. So that trial was initially set for earlier this year. It was right around the time I was supposed to have my second child. So April. We've been preparing for it for a very long time. We were ready to go. We're talking like on the eve of trial, like we were flying out the next day to New Jersey is where the case is consolidated. It was going to be, a month or so long trial. Right before we left, we found out that the judge was retiring. He had had some illness right before it, so there was a slight delay in the trial. And then he announced that he was going to be resigning. And so we do have a new judge assigned now as the chief judge of the District of New Jersey. She was recently reassigned. We have our first case management conference coming up next month. We think there's a good chance we're going to trial, but sometime later this year.
Tell us a little about how it started out in the beginning. So what's your actual role in the lawsuit? You have a job.
Yeah, so I'm on what's called the Plaintiffs Executive Committee. There's kind of tiers to the way this leadership is typically structured in litigation like this. So there's the co-lead counsels. And so my partner, Daniel Nigh, is one of the co-lead counsels. Then there's the Plaintiffs Executive Committee, and myself and my partner, Marlene Goldberg, are both on the Executive Committee. And there's a handful of attorneys nationwide on the Executive Committee. And then my specific role on the Executive Committee is co-chair of the Science and Experts. Then there's another layer below us, the steering committee, that also helps with everything in the litigation. So there's lots of attorneys nationwide that are involved in this litigation.
You know more about the science of Valsartan really than maybe anyone. Your job is to prep the experts for trial, to write the applications to the court and educate the court, the jury, everyone about the science of this case, actually. That's you.
Correct. And my co-chair, Rosemary Bogdan, is also a co-chair of the Science and Experts. And I will say that she knows an astounding amount of the science on this litigation as well.
So people who are out there who are thinking about calling a law firm, what's the process like if you want to, talk to a lawyer? Are they going to have to out of pocket a bunch of money?
All of these lawsuits we're doing our contingency fee. So the consultation's free. Us filing the lawsuit, we bear all that cost. All the costs for medical records, for experts, the attorneys bear all that cost on a contingency fee. So if we recover at the end of the day, then we're going to get our costs back plus the fee. But there's no upfront cost, and you're not going to pay anything at all unless we win. But I would encourage people, if you've had cancer after taking Valsartan, to contact an attorney soon. It does take time for us to work these cases up, to get all the records we need, get the hospital records we need. File suit and everything. We want to make sure we're preserving any statute of limitations there may be, and just to have your case on file in time in case there's any negotiations going on, that we can consider your case at the same time.
Things that come up with class action cases, sometimes people are, I shouldn't join the class because it might affect my personal injury case. What if I become sick later? Is it going to preclude? Do you have any advice for people who are getting these notices or class notifications? How does that interplay with the personal injury aspect?
Yeah, so it's different than the personal injury aspect. If you get these class notices, you're automatically opted in. You don't have to opt in yourself for the class part of where you paid for the medications. But that does not opt you into the personal injury side. So just because you've got this class notice that for the medication you paid for, if you got cancer, you still need to contact an attorney, and it's a separate lawsuit for if you develop cancer after taking this.
These class notices go out. A person who receives a class notice, maybe just walk them through, what is a class notice? What does that mean for them?
Yeah, so it's basically just letting you know that there's this class action that you are a part of, where you took a medication, or you paid for a medication that was contaminated, and that it was about to go to trial. And if the class action for that part wins, you would be entitled to some amount of money. Now, the amount of money on a class action for what you paid for a drug isn't going to be a ton of money, but it is going to be uniform across all the plaintiffs. And what I mean by uniform is, if you paid X amount for the Valsartan, one prescription, someone else paid the same amount, that's what your damages are. If you paid for 12 of them, then you get 12 times as much. Very different when it comes to a personal injury case. A lot of people still think these personal injury cases are class actions. They're not. It's a multi-district litigation. It's a mass action. It's very different than a class action in that the damages are not uniform. By nature, if it's a personal injury, your damages are different than someone else that was injured. It's very specific to that person, and your causation is specific. How much of this medication did you take? How contaminated was it? That's all going to go to the value of your case if you were injured. So the injury cases will get a very unique amount of money. It won't be a standard amount that every person gets. It's going to be dependent upon the strength of those cases. But there are a lot of advantages to the MDL that I think a lot of people don't recognize. So, a lot of the public sees the MDL and sees the negatives of it. They think it just takes a long time, and they're just another one of many people in litigation. There's many strengths that comes with an MDL that the public doesn't realize. And that the big part of that is proportionality. So a big part of what we have to do is get all these documents from these companies, and it's millions and millions of documents, and it costs them millions and millions of dollars to produce all these documents. What these companies will typically do, if it was a one-off case, is they can go to the judge and say, Judge, this is going to cost us so much time, so much money for one case. And the judge will say, yeah, you're right. That's not proportional. You don't have to produce all those documents. Because we have thousands of people that have developed cancer because of this, that tips the scales on our side. And the judge says, no, this is proportional now. There's thousands of people that got cancer from this. You have to spend all that time and money getting all these documents to send to them. And that's how we're able to really build these cases. And I don't think you would not be able to build them properly without an MDL structure. And the same goes for depositions and experts. So all the depositions that we take, when we've taken hundreds and hundreds of depositions in this litigation, it's one of the most I've seen depositions taken. Those apply to every single plaintiff. So we don't have to take the same deposition 1,000 times. Wouldn't be efficient. Same with experts. So every time I work an expert up, we submit an expert report. That might cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to work up some of these experts that are, Harvard grads or Harvard professors and stuff like that. But that expert report applies to every single plaintiff. So that also keeps everyone's costs down at the end of the day, to where they get more money if and when it resolves.
And the cost is deferred amongst all those people. I think that's a really great point. The expert costs are, I was going to bring that up next, it's just astronomical to have the science and medicine to go against really several different medical device companies or drug companies. This is what they do every day, and you have to have multiple high-level experts, and those are typically very, very expensive.
We have to have the best experts because we're going against a pharmaceutical company that has a very large amount of money they're sitting on, and they want to protect that money, and they'll spend a whole lot of money to protect the rest of the money they have. So they're going to buy or pay for the very best experts that are out there. And if we don't have the same caliber experts, we're not going to win a trial.
What about the individuals who have potentially passed away already or will while this is ongoing? How does that work?
Good question. So ones that have already passed away, if you're aware of a loved one that passed away that took Valsartan and had cancer, still contact an attorney. It would still be something we'd be interested to look into, set up an estate. There's things that we can do to still file the lawsuit. The other part of your question, what happens if someone dies during, this litigation, which unfortunately happens? It's a concern lots of clients bring to me, something I understand a bunch because of how long they take. And yeah, I've had numerous clients, especially in this litigation, pass over the last 6 years when we're dealing with cancers. Some of these cancers are like pancreatic cancers that can take you pretty quickly. The lawsuit does not go away if you pass. It will go to someone else, either through various state laws, your spouses, children, stuff like that. If you have a will that specifies who you want it to go to, and if not, we can set up estates and stuff like that to make sure the money gets where it's supposed to if a plaintiff dies while the litigation's pending.
I think that's a really great overview of the Valsartan litigation. Any kind of parting thoughts on where we are, where we're going, that you want to leave with?
We're gearing up for trial. We're hopeful that we have a trial here soon. I think we'll have a big result. Stay patient, stay tuned. We'll keep people updated when there's big updates out there.
And where can people find you, Brett?
So my website's nighgoldberg.com. You can find me there.
We'll link Brett specifically. You can reach out to his firm directly, and he writes really good updates. You can also subscribe here or check out our website. We continue to try to post the updates as they come out.
Yeah, you do a great job with your updates on everything. Always impressed.
All right. Thanks, Brett.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
That concludes this episode of the King Law Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe and check out our socials at King Law Attorneys. And if you've happened to have been injured or charged with a crime, now you know who to call. King Law. Take charge.